Good evening and welcome to the first installment of our lives with Barebones Survival. And we are starting out our little journey, as it were. We're setting the scene, as it were. Looking at what it is that we're actually dealing with and why it is important in this regard. And as you may know, if you have followed any of my videos thus far, you would realize very quickly that we are interested not in military type survival, but rather civilian, which makes it, of course, a very different viewpoint. And while we will go into more depth in the different things as we go along, one of the key factors is that as a civilian, your priorities, aims, abilities, and more are going to be very different to that of the military. And therefore, we need a completely different form of thinking in terms of civilian survival. And we're going to have to start right at the very, very basics with what are we actually talking about, and rethink, because you'll find that in terms of gear and kit and things like that, I think it would be very fair to say that much of the gear might very well be the same no matter what kind of survival you're talking about, but your thinking is going to be very, very different. Now, to give you an understanding of it, I have drawn most of my knowledge not only from doing a lot of outdoor and bushcrafty type stuff, and I was in the military briefly, and things like that, but also from examining how things went in genuine natural disasters and what was priorities and more for people that actually went through them, what they reported back. And it would probably surprise you what was said, things that were quite different to the standard in that regard. But a little housekeeping before we begin. We only have one rule on the channel, so to speak, and that is don't be rude. If you come on to disrupt or be rude, we will boot you off. But that said, we welcome comments. We welcome both agreement or disagreement, different opinions. Absolutely interact as much as you like. Do like, share, subscribe, and all of the other good things that go along with setting up the channel and keeping it going. As I say, this is our first one, so I hope you guys will enjoy it. But we're going to start off by redefining what survival is. And I've based this for a number of reasons, not on my research, to explain issues, shall we call them that, as a civilian you need to deal with. And it's ultimately based on the reality that you are, in fact, a civilian and not a soldier. Now, the first reasoning behind is, besides all the physical training a soldier goes through, which is very important, they also undergo mental training. And this means that, by and large, you are more capable of handling the stress of a survival situation and dealing with it because of your training. Also physically, I mean, when I was in the military, I was very young, very fit, very strong. We were trained daily, and we were capable of managing things that the average civilian simply cannot, because we have a life. We don't spend all day, every day, training and getting fit and all of that. We go to work, we do things, but no less do we want to be able to survive in an emergency situation. Now, with that in mind, we work on the psychology of a person, and we know in our very sort of bones, excuse the pun, that a survival situation is one where you're in danger of imminent death and you need to get out of it. And for a civilian, that's critical because it is the only key point for survival. We know in a very root level, without being told, that to survive means not dying in a serious situation. That's what it means. And the only response to that is to get out. We are not soldiers whose job it is, when faced with extreme danger, to run into it, to manage it in whatever capacity we are as a soldier. It's not our job to take on an enemy. As a civilian, when something happens, our job is to get out. Now, this matters very much in terms of your mental ability to cope, because we know that you don't deal with survival, you get out of it. Emergencies, on the other hand, we can deal with. We do deal with emergencies every single day. Small ones, granted, but we have the sort of understanding in our minds that an emergency is to be dealt with. We can deal with it. What we can't do is deal with survival. And in that regard, we need to think in terms of, when faced with survival, we use the bare minimum of gear and skills to get out, and thereafter turn it into an emergency situation, which might still be dangerous enough to be a threat to life, but we can deal with an emergency. And therefore we put ourselves mentally back in charge, which is critical, because if you go and look at narratives on survival situations, the thing that really caused people to fail was very often not the gear or the skill or the physical strength. It was often the mentality. The people in question couldn't mentally hack it and gave up, and that's when things went south. So the ability to change it into an emergency situation which you can deal with in your mind is critical. Now, I will give you an example, and I will start by saying that for a civilian then, the definition of survival is that situation where, should you do nothing, you will probably die. So your only response to that is get out. Now, things that I have myself been in, I was once in a block of flats on one of the upper floors. I had a flat there, and it caught fire. Now, it was not my job to do anything about it. It was not my job to try and go and be a hero or anything like that. My one job was get out of the building. Once out the building, there might still very much be a lot of issues. Why was it on fire? What had happened? All the rest of it. I mean, maybe the zombies had risen and we had to deal with that. But the key point was, my first task, my survival task, was get out. Thereafter, it's an emergency to be dealt with. I was once in a car accident, and obviously the car was at risk of possibly catching fire. I needed to find out if I was injured or the rest of it. So my first task in that accident was get out. Once out, I can assess my health, assess the health of those who were with me in the vehicle, see what the story is, figure out where I was, how I would be able to get help or to get home, all the rest of things. But that's an emergency. That I can deal with. My primary task was get out. The second important thing that really is the most important for civilian survival is that it's likely to happen in one of two places or between them. You see, 99% of the time, you're either at home or at work. Now, if you're younger, you can substitute work for school, but it's between one of those two places that you're most likely to be. Either at home or at work or traveling between the two. And that's when your survival and emergency situations are most likely to occur. Now, I would put it to you, in fact, that unless you were really not thinking about things, if you were to go bushcrafting for a week, camping for a week in a remote area, by and large, you're going to take gear with you that you will use should you get into some kind of a more extreme situation. Because generally, unless you're really silly, you don't go out without taking the right gear, the right food, etc., 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 which means you're less likely to end up in a survival situation when you go out like camping or bushcrafting or hunting or whatever, because generally you go prepared. What that means is that it's when you are not ready for it that you're likely to get into a situation. So we need to talk about, first of all, the kind of situations you're going to be in, also the kind of person you're likely to be, and thereafter start looking at the way to approach these things as a civilian to survive. Now, I remember reading a very interesting report on one of the, not that long ago, major disasters in America. It was down in Florida, I think. There was major flooding. And funnily enough, one of the top survivalist type guys that's got a YouTube channel and everything lives in that general region. And on many of his channels, he had said, look, we've got so much water in the area, good drinking water and rivers and things, because we're up in the mountains, it will never be a problem for me. I can always refill and carry on, which sounded great. But when he gave feedback on the disaster, one of the first things he said was, I was wrong. Because it was flooding, the flood water got into the sewer systems flooded, and now the groundwater and the rivers and all of these wonderful water sources were suddenly contaminated. So all of the water he thought would be available wasn't. So that's something that he didn't expect. Now, among those most afflicted, they prioritized the things that they needed the most coming out of the situation. And they said, well, shelter was never a big deal because the CDC and whoever else they've got for emergency personnel organize places where they set up beds in church halls and things around the place out of the danger zone. So they went to a safe spot. They said the biggest difficulties that they faced was getting enough drinkable water, getting enough food, and, laugh all you want, getting enough toilet paper. So those were the priorities, not fancy gear or having the best axe or whatever. It was real life practical things that suddenly were not available. Now, with all of that, and now that we've been joined by a whole lot, I'm going to remind you all to like, share, subscribe, do all the good things for me, press them buttons, and let's begin. So, what kind of things as a civilian are you likely to encounter? Now, of course, the first and big sort of disaster type thing that's going to be a major effect on an area is obviously going to be a natural disaster. Earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, particularly because those affect a large area. They will, as we have already mentioned, disrupt access to things we take for granted. All of that freely available water in Florida that could have been drunk suddenly couldn't be. This makes a situation difficult. So that would be one of the primary. I know that people say you've got to prepare in case of great war or whatever. No, not really. By and large, that rarely happens for most of us. Yes, it does, and we have seen that it absolutely has in the Ukraine and similar places, but that's not the most likely. The second most likely is what they talk of outdoor accidents. And while you might think this includes hiking or camping, and yes, it can, those aren't the major places. What you're really looking at, especially in a country like South Africa where we are, where we travel long distances on a regular basis, vehicle breakdown in a remote area, absolutely. We live in a very hot country, which means that water sources become important. You can run out of water very quickly. And that can be a serious issue in that regard, more so than food or anything like that. So water is very critical. Dehydration and things like that are critical. Now, they do talk about societal collapse or war. And yes, that can be a very serious thing. But again, remember, in a situation like that, we're not running into the danger as a soldier would. We are getting out. We are not expected to engage an enemy or be a hero. We're expected to get out the way, get to a safe location as fast as possible. So our aims will be completely different. The next level thing is going to be a home-based emergency where you suddenly don't have access to all the things you are used to. If there is no safe water, you can't drink out the tap. And I mean, how often do we just think, oh, I'm thirsty, I'll go get some water out the tap? And we do. If that no longer becomes possible, what would you do? What happens if there's a major storm and, I don't know, the house starts to collapse due to an earthquake or something like that? These are things that are possible, and of course equally so at your work. Now in South Africa we don't generally have the situation where we use underground trains and such, but you certainly do in other countries. And one of the things which somebody pointed out, and he was a young guy actually who was building his own kit, and he pointed out that he always carries glow sticks because they don't use any kind of electricity that might create a spark. They don't require any live flame that could be caught on either. And that's very important to him because he would travel between home and work on the underground train. And in an enclosed space, any released flammable gases, which you might not be able to smell or know are there, if you start lighting your lighter, could cause an underground explosion, which would make matters way worse. And having a couple of light sticks Because if the grid goes completely down and your electricity is not working, you would be totally in the dark. A couple of light sticks and you've got light without an ignition source, which means you can find your way to the surface. And right there, it proves the civilian point I was making, that your primary rule is get out. Once you're on the surface, it's just an emergency and you can make a plan and manage. So clearly this guy was thinking about his personal situation in a way that was really effective in that regard. It was very clever. And that's the kind of thinking that as a civilian we will need. Now I'm going to disabuse everybody of a couple of the famous survival requirements. By and large, no matter who you are very, very unlikely to be building shelters. A basic shelter that you need to consider for survival is literally the barest minimum, comprised of the clothing you wear, which is your primary shelter, and an addition to, which means something maybe to keep the rain off, and those extremely light packable rain ponchos might be cheap plastic, but you can store them easily and they weigh virtually nothing. And remember, we're not doing this as I'm going for a week camping, where you would take gear relative to that. We're talking something you can have on hand for that once off. So they become incredibly useful. A Mylar survival blanket, absolutely, for the once off, it will work. So your shelter requirements are often very limited. And I would even go as far as to say these survival tents are a waste of time for most of us, because especially if you're in a city environment, you're not going to be putting up a tent. You could, however, use a Mylar sleeping bag, which are equally small and don't require putting up. And they do work. Second point, first aid. They tell you should have all of these fancy medical gear things, tourniquets and all the rest of it. Well, no, you shouldn't, because most of us aren't medically trained. And unless you've got a situation such as a fast and effective emergency response service in your country, if you've got to sort out how to use those pieces of equipment yourself, you need to be trained, which means that you cannot use a tourniquet on your own, because it takes training. You've got to know the release stages. You've got to know when it went on, how long before you need to allow it released to avoid the cyanization of your limbs. The list goes on. So it's not the fault of the equipment. It's great equipment, but you can't necessarily use it. And you need to carry equipment that, even without training, you can basically use, or with minimal training, you can basically use. Remember that in terms of medical, in a survival situation, you are not trying to replace a trauma surgeon. You're trying to get yourself in a situation where you will survive and then go on to somebody who's properly qualified to treat you. So your entire viewpoint is going to be deal with a bleed, splint a leg enough to be able to travel yourself, transport yourself, and not pass away before you get back to help, which is the critical point. Food and water will be a priority, quite simply because, well, without enough water, they say you can last 3 days. I'm putting it to you, in somewhere like South Africa, yeah, you're pushing things pretty hard to make 3 days simply because of the heat. Food, yes, certainly you can go a lot longer, but as a civilian, we are generally far less trained and tough, and many of us might in fact have medical issues, which means we do need to eat more. So it's not going to be like in the movies. You're not going to be the hero, and we need to talk about that as well. In terms of navigation, they talk about you've got to have a proper lensatic compass. No, you don't. Most of us know which way we're going. Most of us know broadly where home is or where work is. We're not running around trying to find a single small area. We're doing general navigation to get out of the problem, which means a basic compass, and you'd be far better off learning to effectively use a map to do basic orienteering. So no, you don't need that much. In terms of signaling, however, pretty much, yeah. You want to make as much noise as possible and attract the attention of people who can possibly rescue you as fast as possible. You are not a soldier. You are not trying to sneak around and engage an enemy. You're trying to get out of an issue. To this end, things like a loud whistle, a signal mirror, and all of that absolutely is incredibly useful kit. So, yes, prepare, plan, have the right gear, but more importantly, think right. Because if you think right, you're likely to live longer. Now let's talk about the next problem. Civilian survival is not military survival. The average soldier, and by this I am referring to an active soldier, is young, strong, fit, trained, and all the people on whom they will rely that are with them are also all of those things. Whereas, by contrast, civilians can be old, have chronic illnesses and difficulties, may have Alzheimer's, might not be able to walk even, may have small children. There's all sorts of people in civilian society that you don't have to work with in a military situation, and you have to be able to manage that kind of thing. I put it to you, and you can argue if you wish, that if you have, say, you, your wife, and a 2-month-old baby, no matter how skilled or knowledgeable your wife might be, or you might be, one of you will be of no help in managing the survival or the emergency, because the other one is going to be looking after the baby, who, and it sounds awful to say, will be nothing but dead weight. They can't help you in that situation. But, I mean, what's the other option? You can't sort of leave them behind and reckon, well, we'll make another one. No, they're going with you, which means that you've got to manage that. And babies do not bully through without 3 meals a day. They need constant feeding. They need new nappies all the time. They need constant looking after. That's a reality, and you, as a civilian, have to deal with that. Funny enough, I know a guy who lived in a small village in the Ukraine with his wife and her grandmother, who had Alzheimer's, right on the border of Russia, and there was one of the first villages to be hit. And literally they heard a message over the radio that said, you have 1 hour, after which the Russian bombers will arrive, get out of the village. He managed, because he was a fairly organized fellow, to be ready within half an hour, car packed, wife ready, and they were ready to go. And Granny's response was, I ain't leaving, my program's coming on. Because she's over 80 and has Alzheimer's, and she didn't understand. They spent a further hour convincing her to get into the car. They got out just in time. Their house was one of the ones that took a direct hit in the bombing. Of course, they got out. He's a Portuguese guy. He made it through to Portugal, to family there. So it ended well, but it shows that it doesn't matter how skilled you are. You're dealing with other people, and you're working at the speed of the slowest member of your group. So it's a different situation. Civilians are on dealing with the situation to get out. The military are dealing with a job. It's their job to go out and do whatever. And if they end up in a survival situation, it's part of the job. It is not part of the job for a civilian. So a lot of civilian things are going to be individual skills, independence, independent problem solving, more than anything else. Whereas in your military, you're working with a team of trained individuals, and survival will happen as a team for the most part. Civilian utilize standardized consumer available gear and things like that, not necessarily specialized gear and things that the military will have. Military gear is designed for the military. They have built into their kits all sorts of equipment to make them mission specific available. Civilians aren't like that. We don't have these things available. By and large, we can't even get rat packs or MREs. Furthermore, the military are taught to deal with these things. You will have members of your team who are specifically medics, members of your team who are designated leaders. You will have members of your team that are trained in specialized tasks to make you effective as a whole. Civilians are not. At best, you're self-taught. You manage to get a few courses. You're probably largely unfit. You will never be at the level of a soldier. I can remember back in the day that I could carry 200 kgs around, no problem, when I was fully trained. Nowadays, you show me a flight of stairs and I'm already out of breath. That was a long time ago. It's a reality, and you have to deal with it. This means that your ability to carry gear is far less. Furthermore, you have the legal part. You are not going to be wandering around on your average day with an 80 kg pack on your back, a machete at your side, and a rifle in your hand. You're just not. You've got a job to go to, you've got things to do, and you can't be lugging around stuff like that. What this essentially comes back to is the reality that what we consider as gear important to survival as a civilian is going to be very, very different to what is important to the gear any soldier will use. We need to manage things in terms of who we are, where we are, and the legalities surrounding. In many places, a lot of stuff isn't even legal to carry. That puts that out. We also have to deal with the social laws. You can't just walk around town all the time without people starting to think you're really off your head if you are always dressed in camo clothes and you've got your pack on your back. No, that's not. It's not that you legally are not allowed, but the social law says you're not allowed, because that's life. So you have to balance you're living with your survival. So many of the military kits would be great to have in, say, an emergency bag if you ever had to evacuate. Yes. Might be great usable gear for camping, hunting, and all the rest of it. Yes. It's not survival gear, not for a civilian. So what is? Well, in order to understand the thinking, I started doing some research as to what really matters. And right off bat, the very first problem that you are forced to deal with, because you are not massively fit necessarily, because you are going to have gear and stuff with you for a lot of different things. So, for example, if you have a baby, half your gear will be baby stuff. Just know it. It will not be exciting, but there will be bottles. There will be ways to sterilize the bottles. There will be formula. There will be nappies. And this isn't your hardcore let me be Rambo stuff. This is you're carrying it for the baby, and the baby's carrying nothing. You're going to have to carry all of that and the baby. If you have an elderly relative with Alzheimer's, maybe in a wheelchair, they're not carrying anything either. You're pushing them. That's how it goes, which means all of their food, their gear, their needs, you're carrying it. Which means you've got to be able to keep your kit to a barest minimum. Your survival gear must be the sort of stuff that you can fit in a pocket. It's the bare bones, hence the name, of survival. But you can then say, I've got my barest needs. Now I can start to add on those things that make it possible for my situation. And that is where the importance comes in. Now, how do I get to this? Well, I started realizing that kit weight is a significant factor. It impacts a person's mobility, energy levels, the ability to carry essential supplies like water and food, which is the most important, because in this kind of emergency you're likely to be in, no, you're very unlikely to be stopping off and hunting something or stopping off and fishing, or no, that's not what works. Your situation is not going to be food procurement. You've got to have it. In an emergency, you're getting out. You've done the survival part. You've made it an emergency. You're traveling onwards to a safer spot. And it's not going to include procurement in that regard for the most part. There will be, of course, occasions when you can, but less than you might think. So that's your first point. The second thing you need to consider is that in a really bad situation, you may have to self-rescue, but you may also have the ability to get to people who will assist, which is why your signaling becomes far more important for a civilian than it does for a soldier who generally doesn't want to be seen. Your essential gear, your tools, have to be super light, because water and food, which are non-negotiable, are also very heavy, and you can't change that. There is no water light. Generally, it's a pretty fair bet that you need to bank on your movement being walking. That's going to be the standard. You're not necessarily going to be able to use better transport. If you can, massive bonus. Even a bicycle will improve your ability to travel hugely. And in fact, if there is anything like an EMP or something like that, probably more so than you might think. If you can go out in a truck where weight stops being a problem, massive bonus. but bank on being on your feet. With this in case, you need to deal with your different aspects. Now, when I was a soldier, I was young, I was strong, I was fit, I was super healthy. Life was great. Well, I'm over 50 now. I'm diabetic. My knees ache most evenings. I'm way not fit. I'm not going to be moving terribly far or terribly fast. It's reality, but I still want to survive. So I'm not going to overload myself with things I don't need simply because it's a bad idea. I want to get out, not end up sitting in place. My endurance is limited. I have to factor in the fact that I cannot do a 40-mile or 80k forced march in a day. I can't do it. It's just not possible. Also, I live very close to the mountains, which means a lot of my movement will be uphill, which slows me even more. Another thing that's not going to happen. We know that we need to, in a situation like this, consider safety as well. The more stuff you've got, the more likely other people trying to survive might try and take it from you. So the ability to move is important so that you can run away, which is the job of a civilian. Run away. Now, this means you have to figure a way to prioritize essentials, okay? Things that are the easiest to carry, the most effective to use, and require the least processing to use, no matter what it is. This means that food that you don't have to cook is way better than food that you do. Food that requires minimal, assuming you can get it, such as dried foods that maybe you just need to boil in water, are the next level because they don't require effort. Boiling water is easy. You chuck in the right amount, you chuck it, stir it, you eat it, you're done. This is important. We need to be able to carry gear that can do multiple things. Now, amongst other things in the modern day, we have a lot of options in this regard because, of course, the outdoors have become popular. And absolutely, your multi-tools and things like that become very useful. It's small, it's compact, it's effective, and you can fit it in a pocket. This works. Clothing choices. Layer. Bottom line fact. Have on the kind of clothing that can be incredibly light when you take all the outer layers off, but you can start to layer up as you go to make it warmer and warmer as needed. To this end, things like shell jackets, which are wind and weatherproof but very light, are fantastic. You add that to some kind of like sweatshirt type thing, hoodie like I'm wearing because it's warming. On top of shirt and t-shirt, an old military trick that you have a t-shirt under your shirt and it actually cools you and helps keep you a lot more hygienic when you're out in the field. Remember that the sun is your enemy. This means that a long sleeve light cotton shirt will protect you from sunburn a lot better than you might think. Having a hat of some kind, incredibly useful to keep the sun off you, improves your ability to see what's going on around you. So yeah, the good old cowboy hat style thing, absolute brilliant. Your bandana, for all the reasons and uses of a bandana, which we will go into, absolutely. Being that you will be on foot. Socks, jocks, shoes. The three things that, as a civilian, will be the most important things for survival. Good padded socks for comfort that you can walk a long distance in, with backup so you can swap them out and keep your feet dry, because trust me, it's easy to get trench foot and you don't want it. Good strong shoes that can take a beating. If you like boots, great. I like ankle boots myself, but decent, comfortable shoes for walking in, and underwear for all the same reasons as the socks, and a couple of spare pairs. You can manage in dirty trousers, but if you're going to start getting health issues in the sweaty regions, shall we call them, you will have a way worse time, and the impact on you mentally will be unpleasant as well. So deal with it before it's an issue. Consider also the environment through which you are going. If you're going through an urban area, the planning, the tools, the things that you could use as extras on top of the base kit is going to be different to what you're using in a wilderness situation. If you're out in the bush, carrying bolt cutters is an utter waste of weight and space, because you never need them in the bush. But if you're in an urban environment, they can potentially be incredibly useful. Not for all of the Rambo type things of getting into buildings, but for traveling through and getting past obstacles, because urban environments are very much a maze, and we know this. So knowing your environment, knowing your route, knowing where you're going to go, all of these things affect what you will carry. Your gear does also need to be double checked through. I know the military favorite, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. I'm sorry, that's another bullshit thing. It applies to certain gear. It does not apply to all gear, because if you apply it to all gear, you can't carry your gear, and therefore you will end up in a worse situation. Duplication is not always a good idea. Certain key gear, yes, for specific reasons, yes, not all your gear. So to have this as a mantra is a stupid thing. We know that when it comes to your food and water, remember that it's not just about filtering, it's about purifying. And I know for a fact that almost every water source in South Africa is contaminated. It's just the way of things pretty much everywhere. So you need to think about cryptosporidiums like E. coli, Giardia, and all of those kind of things as well, because you will get sick. And raging squirts while you're trying to survive is going to make things very difficult, and you could die from it if you're not careful. Be aware of this. It's a very serious thing. So having the means to deal with that, purifying water, a simple life straw, they're incredibly light, a little costly, but the one I've got, it wasn't terribly expensive, and it can do 20,000 litres, which is more than enough. And that deals with all of your purifying needs, just like that. Tablets are very good as well. Boiling is mostly good, but not entirely. And maybe a couple of coffee filters to help you filter the water, because dirty water is not nice. But remember that a small collapsible funnel will go a long way to making that effective. It's very hard to filter water when you don't have a means to hold the filter in place. Just a thought. Food as well, the kind of thing you can easily carry. Now, in South Africa, of course, we've got the famous biltong, which works very well. Granola bars, they work very well. Energy bars, they work very well. Making some form of dried food is massively useful, and I'm talking not just biltong but vegetables and things that can be reconstituted. Carrying extra electrolyte salts, carrying extra sugars and salts and things to improve matters, all of this will improve your life a great deal. That does matter. First aid as well, remember, it's not just plasters and bandages, it's also medications, anti-allergenic things, anti-diarrhea things, pills that can handle fairly strong pain, not for general use, but in that bad situation so you can keep going and get out of wherever you are. These things will matter. And remember that your emergency kit is not the same as your survival kit. So we've now seen that we're dealing with a whole situation that is not the same as the military deal with. Military survival kits are designed for soldiers, so they work really well for soldiers. But when you're not a soldier, they will not work as well. That's the reality. So you need to be aware of your environment and structure. Soldiers generally get into their situations in a war zone. We don't as civilians. Usually it's at home, at work, where you're not expecting it. The legal framework, you need to know what the laws are around, what you can and can't carry, and what you can and can't do, because when there's an emergency situation like a natural disaster, the laws still apply to you. You might say, yeah, but it was an emergency, I should be able to. Probably not. You will still be taken to task if you Rambo it into somebody's house to raid their pantry. That's a reality. So keep in mind that. Keep in mind as well that a good reason for survival is needed. Now, this sounds like a weird one, but think, when in an emergency and you're really on the edge of giving up, what keeps you going? It might be your religion, your faith, it might be your family, hell, it might be your pet cat. Whatever it is, have a means of connecting to that in your kit, photograph, whatever, that when things are really rough, you can look at it and go, I'm going to get out for that reason. That will give you more strength than you can imagine and will matter hugely. Remember that the nature of the threat and the purpose you have in an emergency, in a survival situation, is not the same as the military. You want to get out as fast as possible. You want to get to a safe point as fast as possible where you can manage. That's the key thing. And always remember the psychological side. You have to make it, and you need to deal with the panic, the depression, the desire even to give up that you will experience in a situation like that. Now, this means that minimal gear, effective storage of the same, and a sufficiency of food and water and basic shelter, because you're not going to be dealing with all the things that the military are. Now, your base kit is your survival. You then add to it to create kits that you can carry and use that will have additional items for the emergency side of it. Remember what we said at the beginning, survival is that situation wherein if you do nothing, you're in danger of imminent death. You must get out. Your base kit is what facilitates your getting out. After you are out, now it's an emergency to be dealt with. Out the crashed car, out the burning building, out of the ground zero riot, that kind of thing. Not that the emergency isn't also dangerous. Absolutely. It can be. But it's an emergency and you can deal with that. So, with that said, we are now going to look at what are the basics. Now, there's a whole lot of things that are useful, importantly useful, but not necessarily the absolute basics. And we will get to your other items as well. But to give you an idea, when I started off, I went round and I looked at all of the military gears, especially the gears carried by the special forces, and they were great. They really were. And they didn't work, not for a civilian. So with that in mind, I said, well, who is the civilian that does survival? And as you can imagine, the first answer to that was immediately, well, the Bushmen. They do it on a daily basis. What do they carry? And what they carry are the three primary items which form the absolute bare minimum basic of survival, without which you can get about a 60 to 65% less chance of surviving. So they're absolutely critical. And then they would have a couple of other items on what I would call the personal and geographical level. Now, these three levels, primal, personal, geographic, form the basis of your survival kit. After that, you can start talking about an emergency kit, which is your next level up, and is different, or your hiking kit, which would be next level up. But this is the gear that is so utterly basic that it should be on you 24/7, which means it's got to be small enough to fit in a pocket, light enough to carry all the time without getting in the way of the fact that I'm going to work, I have a briefcase full of papers, I've got this, I've got that, whatever. It doesn't get in the way, but it's there when you need it. These are also the items which you will want to be of the best quality, because they are the things that are your absolute last-ditch backup that you are going to rely on. Now, what are they? Well, after I did the Bushman, I went and checked out the Eskimo, and with small modifications to style and geography, they were the same things. I then went and checked out the stories and reports of the early American Indians, what they carried, and surprise, surprise, same. When Otzi Iceman popped up, I checked out what he carried, and again, same. So there are three basic things that form your primary: the blade, the flame, and the cord. These are three things that are almost impossible to remake in any situation. Yes, I know that you've got these incredible experts on primitive survival and stuff, but I put it to you, if you are in a survival situation, you don't have time. And that is the other thing that nobody talks about. Time. You won't have any. Yes, if you have the skill to weave string out of dandelion roots, bully for you. It's a great skill to have, and it's an important one when you're bushcrafting or in the emergency phase. But in the survival phase, you ain't going to do it. This means that you need to have that gear already, so you might as well make it decent quality. So why do I not specify? Well, when it comes to blade, choice matters a lot. It's got to be legal. it's got to be suitable. It's got to be one that you trust, that you will use. It's got to be tough enough to manage what you're doing. It's got to be effective. But it's also got to fit in your pocket and not get in the way. Now, my choice is that. And that is the large side, spear point, straight edged honey badger, made in South Africa from D2 steel. It carries a great edge. It is quite the thick blade. It's very tough. It's pretty lightweight. It's very grippy. It has a great pocket clip, which allows you to keep it in your pocket. This thing I have sharpened once in the 6 or 7 years that I've had it. I carry it every single day. I will not ever change my knife now. It is better than a fixed blade to me in a huge number of ways. It's very comfortable. It fits my hand. You cannot beat it in my regard. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Thank you so much for the likes and the gifts. That is absolutely fantastic. I do appreciate. So ultimately, in terms of the blade, you need to choose the one that you are most comfortable with, that you will rely on, that you approve of, and that you will use on a daily basis, because that's going to be the fallback knife. That's going to be the one. If you prefer a neck knife, great. I hate them. I won't use them. So there you are. My choice. I'm not saying they're bad. That's just my choice. Having said that, your flame. Well, there are a lot of options. And given the nature of things, my tendency is to take a very small ferro rod and tape it onto the side of a Bic lighter or onto a refillable lighter like a clipper, which is even better, making sure that it's got a good flint inside it and it is full. And between the two, I will not only have a ferrocerium rod that I can use as a real backup, I've got a lighter that works and a tiny bit of duct tape that holds it on, which I can use a flame extender, and that basically covers my fire in multiple ways, and I can stick it in my pocket very easily. So right there we have a major, oopsie, sorry. There we go. It doesn't want to do what it's supposed to do. There we go, sorted out. We've been going a while and it wanted to know if I was still alive. Yes, I am. So, blade and flame dealt with. You can carry what you prefer, but have something. And there, your rule of 2 is 1, 1 is none does apply. Okay, last item, cord. Now, everybody says, paracord. No, I don't agree. Largely because it's bulky. What I carry is the kind of waxed thread that you will use to sew leather, because I can carry 30 feet of it in a very small roll, which makes it available, easy to carry, and not get in the way. Paracord will absolutely go in my emergency kit, or in my bushcraft kit, or in my camp kit, because it really is that good, but not in my survival kit. You obviously can choose what suits to you, but it's got to be something strong and effective. That covers your absolute basics. Blade, flame, cord. Onto that, I'm going to add 2 more levels. Your geographic and your personal. Personal, in my case, means backup medication, because I take chronic medication, and without it I will be in a very serious situation. plus a single pressure bandage, size 3, which is a far better choice of medical than a tourniquet, because a tourniquet only works on a limb. Pressure bandage can be modified to work on any part of the body, does much the same thing, and can be very effective. If you want to go expensive, get one that's got Celox in it, but you don't have to. Pressure bandage works. It's what I was trained in back when I was in the military. It just works, and you can get a smallish one. Carry 2 even. Why not? They're light. And right there you've got your major personal items dealt with. The only other item I would look at that really matters is the geographic. And this, again, common across the board, be it the Bushmen, the Eskimos, the American Indians, all the rest of it. And that's a means to carry water. Even if you don't necessarily carry the water all the time, the means to carry, and what I like to carry is a 500 milliliter plastic water bottle, which rolls up and can store out the way very easily. It fits in a pocket or something like that without any effort, and it means that if I have to, I can quickly fill it. The other option, which I've actually become greatly enamored of and do want to actually procure some more, because I've only got one. It's seen in every single survival kit ever, and everybody tells you how rubbish it is. Basically, it's a little plastic clip that you can hang on your belt that will clip around the top of like a Buddy Coke bottle, and then you can clip the bottle to your belt. And everyone says that's not survival. Actually, it's more survival than you think, because it means that I can pick up any Buddy bottle and fill it with water, and now I've got 500 mils water hanging on my belt. And if I had 2 of them, that means I can carry a liter of water if I need to easily. Think about that. And the clips are unobtrusive until you want them. And that covers the absolute bare basic kit. Now, of course, you can add to that. There's a lot to add to that. But that forms, in 5 items, your absolute basic survival kit, without which you're in trouble. So with all of that said, I think that was a very good start in terms of where do we begin. And we're going to look at ways of managing all the things we've said. We will talk, for example, of a number of things that they say you absolutely have to have, and whether or not they're worth having. Flashlights, your radios, your specialization medical kits, your first aid manual. If you need a manual, you shouldn't have gone out in the first place. Just saying, it's not part of your survival kit. Read it at home and learn. When it comes to skills, what are the first skills to go for? Because there are specific ones that matter. A multi-tool, yes, 100%. In fact, I carry as my blade my honey badger. You might want to replace it with a good quality multi-tool. Depends on how you do things. My multi-tool tends to ride in my pack, whereas my knife stays on my belt or in my pocket. So it does depend on you in that regard. What about blankets? What about duct tape? Sanitation supplies? Bad news, guys, 50% of the world's made up of women, and they need specific things. Right there, that's where we begin. It's important. And with all of that said, we are going to end the live there for tonight. I hope you have enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. It's been very interesting. And I think it's done good stuff for us. And we will take this further next week. And I think that a Thursday is a fine night for the Survival Live. So you can find me here on Thursday nights at 10 o'clock South African time. On the other nights, in case you're interested, I do a supernatural and paranormal channel for fun and games, if you are interested. So look for Strange Bones. Yes, I'm Bones. That is my name. So between the two, that's what we have. And until the next time, I shall bid you all good night, and I do hope that you stay safe out there. Have a good one.